whole life, I've wanted to be a filmmaker. When I was a kid, I stole my parents' 1990s JVC video camera. I made up stories about being track stars or going to Mars that my siblings, friends, and I filmed in our living room and backyard. I was homeschooled from kindergarten through the end of high school. And to my parents' credit, they saw my love for filmmaking and incorporated it as a part of our curriculum. They weren't filmmakers themselves by any means, but they gave me space to explore and create. When I was 9 years old, I shot an adaptation of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory into my own film, casting other homeschool kids to play the roles in the movie. A few years later, I adapted the book Lunch Money by Andrew Clements into a 40-minute film that we showed at a local art gallery. But when I was 13, wrapping up 8th grade, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to make a movie that was entirely original. A story I had totally concocted on my own that I wanted to be a real, proper, 90-minute feature film. And this is what actually happened.
Thank you guys all so much for coming out, and I hope you enjoy the show.
What's happening?
Now, I want to get a couple things out of the way first. We weren't a wealthy family. We grew up in the Midwest in a beat-up old house that my parents bought at an auction and fixed up themselves. My mom stayed at home with us as a homeschool parent, and my dad was a professional storyteller.
Stay with me here. Hey, Lurkin.
Hi, Larry.
Oh, Faith Blarney.
Meaning he would go to schools and libraries and tell stories to groups of people. On a really good year, we probably lived on about $40,000 as a family of 5. We had 1 car. Now, as part of our homeschooling, one of the things that my parents really leaned on was the idea of creative writing. I treasure notebooks. It's in here. Here it is. I think this first draft of the story was when I was 9 years old. The top, it says Murphy and the Red Crystal. It starts, one warm spring day, a boy named Murphy walked to school. That was my opening sentence. You can also see as part of like our curriculum, so we would go through and write, and then my dad also like wanted to help us become better writers, become better spellers, become better at grammar, and he would like make marks on the page, and then we would edit those marks and then rewrite those on a new document. Now, this first draft of the story is what I wrote when I was 9 years old. I believe then the next year I wrote a second draft. This is my second draft. You can see the writing is a lot cleaner. I think I was probably 10 years old when I wrote this. And it starts, it was an average morning in the town of Greenville. The birds chipped merrily in the soft spring air. A little brook sang its sweet song as it trickled through the mossy rocks. The only thing disturbing the pleasant sounds of spring was a young boy. His name was Murphy. Same story. Murphy's walking to school. So this is like age 9, this is age 10. I mean, each one of these probably took me 6 or 8 months to write. I want to say there was a third one somewhere. As I'm writing this, I also made my first film, Willy Wonka, which is when I was 9 years old. I got a group of people together and we did an adaptation of the book Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And it was all kids in it. Our grandpa Joe was like 7 years old at the time. He was fantastic. I played Willy Wonka in the film. My friend played Charlie. We ended up shooting everything at my parents' house and redressed the space for all of the different locations. Shooting that project was a lot of learning, right? It was a lot of learning about how to coordinate people together. It was a lot of learning about, look, okay, you're gonna take this thing that is a story that exists in the world and you're gonna turn it into a screenplay. How are you gonna do that? How are you gonna tell that story in a compelling way? And then once we had all that shot, I had to actually edit the movie into something that people could watch. As I was finishing that, I started my second film, Lunch Money, based on the book by Andrew Clements. Hold on, I definitely have the lunch. Where's the Lunch Money folder? Here we go. Yeah, so like this film I actually wrote out into something resembling a screenplay format. It looks like I wrote this just in Word. Scene 22, set, playroom. It was a lot more coordinated. So like I had a proper script that was really written out. I drew storyboards for some of the scenes. So there was a little bit more planning between like Willy Wonka and Lunch Money. I don't have anything from Willy Wonka. But I also felt a certain level of confidence that like, okay, I'd made this 40-minute adaptation of a book, and I'd also been writing this story for the last couple of years. Like, can I turn that story into a movie? So as I'm finishing Lunch Money, I said, I think I can make an actual proper feature film. 2013. Keep in mind, at this point, I'm still a 13-year-old kid. Like, I don't really know what I'm doing. I still have like pretty crappy equipment that I can use to make things, but like I really want to make this proper movie. So I figured out how to write a screenplay. There was a program back in the day called Celtics. There used to be a desktop version. And this is a copy of my first film. This is the first 22 pages of the screenplay, but as you can see, it's like written in proper screenplay formatting. Now, as like an actual filmmaker, I know there's a lot of things now that are incorrect about this, but you know, if you just sort of glance at a page of this, it looks like a proper screenplay, right? And this opens the same way the film does. In a land called Molliest.
Evil has fallen over the land, but is all lost?
Anyway, so like this is the actual screenplay that I wrote. Again, a lot of this was stuff I found on my own. I researched and figured out, how do you write a screenplay? My parents didn't know how to write screenplays, and so how do you write a screenplay? What's free screenwriting software you can use? I believe I had access to like my sister who had just graduated college, like she got a new laptop, and so I had like access to her old like 2006 laptop. And as I was writing the screenplay, I wasn't really thinking about like what is the scope of what we actually can make. I just had this idea and I wanted to turn it into a reality. I wasn't too concerned about the practical side of things at all. All of the skills that my dad taught me in terms of writing and revising and editing came into play as I'm working on this. Like putting together what I believe this ended up being a 76-page screenplay is a lot of work. Like that's a lot of writing to do. That's a lot of typing to do. But then also, how do I write this in a way that other people can read, right? Like a screenplay isn't just something for me, but it's a document that I can hand out to other people to say, this is how we're doing this scene. This is how we're gonna play it out, and communicate that openly and clearly to them. And then also going through and taking what you have and going, well, how can I make it better? How can I edit this? How can I revise this? How can I improve it? So there was a lot of sort of incidental learning that occurs when you're having to like put together a screenplay for something. And then the other side is, okay, I have a screenplay, and I knew at this point I didn't want to play the main character in it. Can I bring on other people to play these characters? And I had a friend named Aiden who I adored, and I thought he would be fantastic as playing the lead. We were homeschooled together. We did homeschool gym together. And so I asked him if he'd be willing to play the lead in the film, and he said yes.
Allegro! 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 That was so awesome.
You are so lame.
And so then it was a matter of just finding other people to play all of the other roles. Now the nice thing was I was planning to shoot this over the summer so I could ask people that were in school who would be out and around to like help out. And I remember at the time not really thinking about like behind the scenes people. It was much more of like, I need people to be in front of the camera. I need like actors in this movie. And in our lunch money film, I was able to get actual adults to play the adults in the movie. And so I reached out to many of the same people, and some of them were gung-ho, some were a little reluctant, but I was able to find people who were actually willing to play the adults in the film.
Look, honey, it's normal for us to talk about serious matters after you go to bed.
Setting up shoot times and coordinating with them and their work schedules and saying, hey, are you available on this day between 3 and 5 to like come over and film this scene? Filmmaking is so many different aspects. It's not just, okay, we're gonna like place a camera here and a light there and shoot the scene. It's like, how do we get everything in place before any of that actually happens to make that movie possible? My plan was to start shooting that summer. And throughout all of this, I was like creating concept art for like the different characters. There were sword fights in the film, and so I designed my own like way that the sword fights would work. This is for like one of the enemy soldiers. This one like actually looks really close to what we ended up having in the movie. But the biggest problem is I hadn't thought about how we were gonna actually make this movie happen. So my parents had an old garage behind their house, and the garage was full of junk and clutter, as every garage is, right? And so I went through and I started cleaning out that garage because I knew that we needed a space to actually shoot. Like I said, I didn't really have great equipment at this point, and I was sort of bringing people on board, and I sort of halfway had a script, but I wasn't sure how an actual movie was gonna come out of this. I was just confident that one would. Now, there was a lot of buzz about what I was doing because I was reaching out to our local community to ask for people to be actors, and I was sort of making an announcement that I was making this movie. And that's when sort of a friend of my dad's reached out and says, hey, does your son need a camera to shoot this? And I remember my dad coming home and saying, hey, my buddy Mike asked me, do you need a camera? Like, he's willing to loan you his camera to shoot this movie. That was one of the most powerful moments because it was somebody who I sort of barely knew. I met this guy who was friends with my dad, and Mike was asking if I wanted to borrow his camera, a camera that cost more than like $1,000 to shoot this movie on. And I was just blown away by his generosity. I was blown away by just his openness to like letting me use this piece of equipment. It really like kind of shocked me to my core. I remember telling my dad, like, I don't think this is real. Like, are you sure? Like, is this actually something? My dad was like, yeah, like Mike would be happy to loan you his camera. And it was a proper like HD camera. And I remember getting it about 6 months before we were gonna start shooting and just running tests with it. I remember this camera took SD cards, right? Like little memory cards like this that you could put into the camera. I didn't have to back up tape using FireWire cable anymore. And the images were like beautiful. It was this incredible thing he had given us that like, okay, now we can actually shoot a proper movie. You know, this isn't gonna be low res, like this is gonna be an HD movie. Mike also gave us a green screen that he happened to have. And so we ended up having a camera and a green screen. And suddenly, like this idea, this film that I had that kind of was starting to feel like way too big and like there's no way I can actually make this happen, it was like, oh wow, okay, we can use these. We can use this camera and green screen. We had another family friend who happened to be taking a bunch of stuff to the thrift shop. Like they were just cleaning out their house and taking a bunch of stuff to the thrift shop. And they said, hey, does Mishak maybe want this tripod? And they had this old professional tripod that they were just gonna get rid of. That tripod has been my absolute staple. In fact, this video currently right now is being shot on that tripod. That tripod has traveled with me everywhere. It is phenomenal. And so I had this awesome camera, this awesome tripod. And I was like, oh wow, okay, these things are coming together now. Like it was the community coming together and being so supportive of what I was doing. I ended up mowing people's lawns and raising enough money to buy like a $30 microphone on eBay. And that was the microphone that we taped to the end of a broomstick to use as a boom pole on set. It was through this like generosity of people and the scrappiness of what we were doing that we were able to kind of start to bring things together. And it was like, okay, I think this movie is actually gonna happen. Now, everyone in the movie were kids. Like I was 14 and I was one of the oldest people in the film. One of our lead actors was 9 years old. That was on purpose. He was supposed to be like this small old man and we had to put him in like old man makeup that my sister did. The script was still constantly evolving. We didn't really have an ending to the movie, but we were starting to burn the summer. I don't think we shot anything in June. By July, I realized we really need to start shooting this thing because people are gonna go back to school. Like this just isn't gonna happen. So we started bringing people together and we started shooting the scenes. I remember the first day on set was craziness. We didn't actually shoot anything that we ended up using.
Check.
Has the Dark One arrived?
I have the crystal. Contact Nikonos.
Grenades dropped. Bang!
But by the second and third day, as we were bringing a team together and it was smaller groups of people and we sort of started to get a sense of what we were doing, the scenes got better and I was able to communicate better with the actors about what it is that we actually wanted. We probably shot about half the film at my parents' house, either in little rooms in their house, in their basement. We then shot a lot in our garage, hanging up that green screen, which we didn't know how to light properly at all. So we had lots of issues when it came to post-production trying to key out that green screen. And that garage just got crazy hot. We didn't have any air conditioning in there. I don't know if we even really had a fan. Like we were just sweating. This was hot July and August heat as we're filming this. When I was a kid, my granddad helped us build a treehouse in my backyard. And that treehouse served to be the set for a number of different scenes in the movie. He dressed the treehouse. We shot on the back porch of the treehouse. We shot inside the treehouse. We really utilized all of the space that we could. Now, remember, we were 14-year-old kids. We didn't have access to cars. We didn't really have the ability to go anywhere. And so everything had to be shot within walking distance. If you walked about a half mile down the street from my house, there was a ravine. And the ravine had creeks, it had trees, it had lots of places to go. And so even though we couldn't drive, we could walk down to the ravine.
The crystal is trying to kill you.
Everyone made their own costumes. We bought things in thrift stores. Like, I think in total, the whole budget for this movie was like $400. Like, we really didn't have any money to actually make this. It was finding the things that we had in our house or that other people had in their houses or things that people were getting rid of. Like, hey, this person realized we're shooting this movie. I got some old work lamps. You want to use those to light? Like, yes, please. There's like a carpet in one scene, and I'm pretty sure we found that like in the trash and spray painted it. Probably not a good idea looking back on it, but at the time, that's what we needed to do. There's a number of scenes in the movie where they're flying around in these planes, kind of like Star Wars, and the plane cockpit was built out of cardboard that was spray painted black, and then there was like a wooden frame that was built out of like 1x1s that were like screwed together, and that was spray painted black, and the whole thing was set against a green screen. In retrospect, we definitely used green screens way too much. Now, by the end of the summer, we were still rapidly trying to finish the movie and running out of time. Like, people were going back to school, one of our actors was moving out of state, like, we just didn't have enough time to finish it. And I remember looking at the script and looking at the story and saying, okay, what is it that we absolutely need in order to finish this movie? Like, we have a lot of scenes all over the place. I haven't edited anything. I don't really know what anything looks like, but how many more scenes do we need? And so I made a list of like the 10 scenes we still needed to shoot. And a lot of these were like big scenes that took place in different locations. And so I think most of our actors who were in school had like gone back to school, like it was end of August, early September at this point. And we ended up asking people, hey, can we just take a full Saturday, right? We'll take a Saturday, we'll start at like 8 a.m. and we'll go until we're done, and we're just gonna shoot everything that still needs to be shot. In reality, like, I know that's how movies really are shot, and now that's how I shoot movies, is that you start early and you go till late, but we were kids at the time, and most of our days we would shoot for 3 or 4 hours, right? Like, we weren't used to kind of doing a full long day. And on this day, we needed to do a scene that took place in a dungeon that was massive. We needed to do our big fight scene at the end, and a handful of other scenes that took place throughout the movie. We happened to know someone that like owned a church down the street, again within walkable distance, and they had this big gymnasium in the church, and I asked if we could like shoot the dungeon scene there. At like 4 p.m. that day, I got my whole crew and we walked, you know, a half mile down the street to this church, and we set up and we shot our dungeon scene in the church. But it was just scene after scene after scene after scene. We were like, we're not stopping. And by the end, I remember being so tired. We had broken like 3 different swords.
All right, so here we have Resbin's sword, which I broke when I was fighting Chikon Lensky.
We had a run-in with the cops at one point because we were in a location we really shouldn't have been in. But by the end of the day, I said, I think that's it. Like, we have everything we have. I know people like need to get back to their lives now. I think we might have a movie. That was the summer I was 14 years old. When we finished that summer, I hadn't edited anything. The footage was just sitting on hard drives. My parents had an old computer, and we had a friend who had a piece of software called Adobe Premiere, which I actually still use to edit to this day. But he had a really old version of it that happened to work on my parents' old computer that like didn't work on his new computer, and so he gave it to us. He said, hey, I got this software. If you want to use it, you're welcome to use it. I ended up using that software and learning that software to edit this movie. It took close to 2 years to do the editing and finish this movie. Plus, this was on a shared family computer. Like, we had like 1 or 2 computers in our house, and like my parents had to work and do emails, and so I couldn't spend 8 hours a day on the computer, nor did they want me to. Like, they were very much like wanted to monitor how much screen time I had. This is a document that I created, which is all of the different takes. Battle of the Council. We need to use shot 580, then 581, then 582, then 584, then 586, then 589, then 591. This is how I knew like what scenes I needed to use and what takes I needed to use. It looks like I had my dad go through and we watched the film together and he made notes. So he was like, 52 minutes, great shot. You know, 10:17, that needs to be louder. 12:51, there's no sound, or there's supposed to be sound there. Throughout this too, there were sections that I had left up to post-production, right? So we hadn't really dealt with them on set. One of them was a massive fight with a dragon that occurred about halfway through the film. And the other one was all of these planes. So the characters fly around in these planes in the movie. Like I talked about, I had a little bit of a background doing stop motion. And so I thought, well, maybe I can build these out of models and I can actually create them. I had a friend at the time and they were learning Blender. And they said, why don't I just try to do this in CGI? Like, I think I can do CGI shots of the planes. And so they went through and created CGI shots of the planes. And I think there's like a dozen shots in the movie of like these planes and even some of the locations. There were other elements of the film that were done practically too. Like for the dragon initially, I thought I could create like a dragon puppet and shoot it like against the green screen or against like, I could shoot it outside with like a tree behind it and then I could cut it in. And it just really wasn't working. Like I spent a long time making this dragon model. Once I put it on camera, it just didn't look good. It didn't look convincing. And so then the second thought I had was like, what if we never see the dragon's face? Like, what if we just see its torso? And I think I had just seen like Monty Python. And so I said, what if we have somebody that hand draws a dragon and I can kind of animate it a little bit. Ended up getting a friend who was a very talented artist to just sketch like a dragon body and then put it in Photoshop and then was able to like sort of animate it a little bit. It looks wonky. Like obviously this was a movie made by kids at the beginning of high school. It wasn't perfect, but I also knew it wasn't going to be perfect. As I was working on this film, I started to see it more and more as a multimedia piece, right? Like obviously there's stuff we filmed, but then there was stuff that I created with paper mache. There was a bunch of scenes that we shot in front of a green screen that were supposed to take place in this council room. And so what I ended up doing is building a council room out of toothpicks and hot glue and paper mache and paint and plaster of Paris. And I built this thing and I ended up photographing it and then using that as background in those council room scenes. Now the crazy thing is like none of this really cost any money. Like it was scrappy. It was all built with craft materials that were left over. The swords were foam swords. So all of the sword sound effects are me banging utensils together trying to get a sword sound. The character in the film played by the 9-year-old is supposed to be a really old man. And so we had him talk in his normal voice when we were filming. And then afterwards I went through and overdubbed all of his lines with a really gravelly old man voice.
You must learn to respect your elders, young boy.
In many ways, the movie is silly. but it also was this story that I had been working on for years, really passionately cared about. As I was finishing this movie, I was also still writing the story of it, right? Like, even though I had written it as a screenplay, I still ultimately wanted it to be a novel. I wanted it to be a book. And that fall after we finished shooting the movie, I finally like got my act together and finished that novel. The novel is slightly different than the film because there was a little bit more that we could do with the novel than what we could do with the film. But for Christmas that year, I ended up typing up the novel and I found a service that would allow it to get printed. This is not perfect. There are so many spelling mistakes in here. It was written by a 14-year-old, but I got it printed as an actual book. I think I gave like pretty much everyone of my friends and family a copy of this book, The Red Crystal. The green screens ended up being an absolute pain.
Cut.
I didn't really know what I was doing. My parents' computers at the time just didn't have the processing power to be able to handle most of this stuff. And so there was a lot of like working on something and a computer would crash and then you have to like start over from the beginning. And the effect shots honestly are probably what held us back. I was able to get all the other like pieces that we had shot together, but getting everything else I think is what really took those 2 years. I really wanted to make a big deal out of it. I really wanted to make a premiere out of it. So we asked the person that had let us use the art studio in the past to show our previous film, and he said, yeah, absolutely. And so we ended up having a screening at that art studio for the film, and that was sort of its initial release. But I wanted it to be bigger than that. I wanted it to be something that like really people could come and see, and it could be like an actual proper movie. So there was this theater near us. There was sort of an art house theater, and I remember hearing that somebody had shown their movie there. And so I reached out, I called them, I got in touch, and figured out how we could actually get a movie to play there. And we set up a time to actually show the movie. I found like my actual rental agreement with the theater, and it says on here, Mr. Malley is participating in our Ohio-grown film program. He'll be screening his film, The Red Crystal, on 1/2/17 in House 1 at 7 p.m. Film ends at 8:30 p.m. There will be a 50-50 ticket sales split between Mr. Malley and Gateway. Once that was scheduled, it was like, okay, our movie's gonna play in an actual theater. Like, this is so cool. These were the posters that we put up around town for the movie. The Red Crystal, locally produced feature film by Columbus high school students, one-time event only. And we sent out press releases as well. So this is like one of the articles that got written. That's a frame from the film. I think we had another article in another newspaper as well. And then we just let everyone that we knew, hey, this movie's happening. If you can make it, please try and come. And I think we had close to 150 people actually come to the event, which was crazy. The theater like actually sold like real movie tickets for the movie. It said The Red Crystal on the marquee. It was so exciting. And like the film played and there were problems with it. We didn't really know how to mix sound. There were problems with like, oh, that shot was not, you know, quite the way we wanted it to be, or like that part was like unevenly paced. But to see your film in a theater with your friends who you made the movie with is just such an astounding, rewarding experience. And it was just like this night of celebration. It was so much fun. There was a reporter there who like wanted to do an article for like one of the local magazines. And so he did an article and even had this like beautiful artist sketch of the movie afterwards. Like it was really, really cool. The whole cast and crew went out to dinner and had this big celebration. And so what are my takeaways from making a movie at 14? More than anything, I just have to be thankful for the number of people that were willing to donate their time. Like actual, like real adults who had lives, that they were busy and took time out of their day to come and shoot a scene for this movie for this 14-year-old kid. I'm so thankful to my parents for letting us use their space and take over that garage and just letting me spray paint trash to make into movie props for my strange sci-fi fantasy epic that I was trying to create. There was a lot of lessons of patience in this as well. The movie didn't happen quickly. I was 9 years old when I first wrote that first notebook. I was 13 when I actually wrote the screenplay. I was 14 when we shot it. And by the time it was in theaters, I was 15 or 16 years old. And there were a lot of speed bumps we hit along the way. I remember there being times where like the whole program crashed and we had to just restart. There were a lot of technical errors that we made on set that I didn't really know how to solve in the edit. Is how to animate a 2D drawing of a dragon using Photoshop and After Effects. And those are skills that have really helped me to this day. But the lessons seem to be keep going. And when things aren't working, keep going. And keep trying to figure it out. Creating that movie was one of the best experiences of my life. And when I look back at it now, yes, there are lots of things that are technically wrong with it. There are major issues with sound. There are major inconsistencies in the story. Like, yes, I totally get that. But the amount of learning and the amount that I grew from making that movie was extraordinary. Like, suddenly I had a sense that I can actually do something. Like, I can actually make a feature film. And it gave me confidence. Not that it's gonna happen overnight, not that it's gonna be a success, but with a certain amount of persistence and patience and trial and error, things can actually happen. I was shocked at how many people were on board and wanted to help and wanted to make it into a reality. And the weird part of it is I've never really been able to let it go. Like that whole process. Making that film was such a core piece of my life. And even to this day, I'm still interested in that story. I'm gonna show you something I haven't shown anyone. So last year I went back and I revisited the story. Now looking at it as someone 10 years older, it's a little bit different. I found that there were really interesting pieces in the characters that I had created. Not only had I written this book, but I've also written sequels to it and other addendums and expanded the world in which this exists. Now the world of this story now is rather different than it was when I was 14 and the story that's in the Red Crystal, but I'm still interested in that world that I was building. And so last year I wrote the first season of what could be an audio play of that world. It's a lot less fantasy now, a lot more sci-fi, but many of the same characters are there, the same stories are there, the same concepts are there, and I'm still really interested in these pieces. When I look back at my experience being homeschooled, I had these opportunities to create things that I'm still in love with, like things that still excite me. Making the Red Crystal changed the way I thought about movies, it changed the way I thought about art, it changed the way I thought about myself and my ability to create things in the world. At the end of the day, that's what I find so invigorating about it. Filmmaking is still something that I'm in love with. I still love making movies, and it is nice. I said we made this film probably for around $400 or $500. After that premiere at that local theater, the next day I went to go get my check. We got 50% ticket split each way, and they gave me a check for $550. And if you math that out, you spend 2-3 years of your life and you get $550 at the end of it. Like, what are you doing? But there was something really magical about holding a check in my hand and saying, whoa, I worked together with all these people and we made this movie. And like, we got an actual check at the end of it. Like, we made money off of this thing. Like, this is crazy. And it just made me so excited and it made me want to make more stuff. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you want to watch The Red Crystal, it is on YouTube. Fair warning, it was made by a 14-year-old. There's a lot of issues with it, like I get that, but it is out there if you want to take a look at it. I hope you found this video interesting. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye everybody.